I'm not going to read the first 5 paragraphs which give the background, but I do want you to remember that pre-Renaissance Poland was the exception in Europe because it was a country that had strict and general religious tolerance. A very unique thing. And it was the Reformation, and above all the Counter-Reformation, which made them turn around, and that's what we're going to be talking about. And instead of being welcoming for all religious convictions, didn't mean that everyone had the same rights, of course. The Polish ethnics had more civil rights than the others. The Orthodox bishops, for example, would dearly have liked to be members of the Senate as the Catholic bishops were, but they never obtained that right. And even those Orthodox who became Eastern Catholics and thought it would be natural for them to be promoted to members of the Senate, they never gained that either. But there was this generalized is this good for acoustics? Okay, let's go into the text. On January the 28th, 1573, the Warsaw Confederation was signed in the Diet, the same Convocazione, granted basic freedom to religion, freedom of religion to nobles and freemen in the Rzeczpospolita. I use this word in the sense of the Confederation. Those two words are synonyms in this paper. The double state, which was first Lithuania and Poland with 2 states and 1 head of state. And then the 2 states were merged. So you have growing multiplicity of ethnic groups and also religious groups. The last of the Jagiellonian kings of Poland, Zygmunt II Augustus, had died a few months earlier on the 7th of July 1572 without leaving an heir. He had replaced the personal union of the Kingdom of Poland and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania with the integration of both states in the Union of Lublin. At his death, both the Polish and the Lithuanian nobles sought further guarantees of the continuation of the Union, and the Confederation was the formula chosen for that goal. It was in danger. The Counter-Reformation was already moving into Poland. But more significantly for our interests here is the fact that the text of the Union Charter consisted basically of a series of commitments on the part of the representatives of the various religious communities to respect and support each other's rights. By this time you had not only the Catholics and the Orthodox, but you also had a growing number of Protestants who were not welcome in their home countries, Anabaptists from Switzerland, Mennonites, they got along pretty well, but they came to Poland too. Socinians, anti-Trinitarians, they were all welcome and were present in Poland and had religious freedom. Religious tolerance had indeed long been the tradition in Poland, but recent developments made this new interreligious pact a practical necessity. Poland had by that time acquired a large number of religious refugees from other less tolerant countries. I'm saying what I just said. These included smaller groups such as Anabaptists, Mennonites, Socinians, and others who had been persecuted or not very well tolerated, let's say, according to the different cases in their own countries. Religious wars had been ravaging many parts of Europe, and there was some fear that interconfessional violence might spread to the Rzeczpospolita. The Confederation was seen, this was just a few months after the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. And that had to be avoided for, at the very least, for civil stability. The Confederation was seen as one of the best ways of avoiding such violence in the Commonwealth. One of the most pressing reasons still to seek to guarantee religious liberty was the fact that the Catholic counter-reformation was becoming more and more influential in Polish lands. Not only the Polish ones, but the Ruthenian and strictly Lithuanians. And could soon threaten the legitimacy of the tradition of religious tolerance. In fact, Catholic religious authorities were generally hostile toward the Warsaw Confederation, which was to maintain religious tolerance. And only one Catholic bishop, Franciszek Krasiński, was among the signatories. So you had this push to maintain the tolerance, but the Catholic Church was moving more and more in the direction, the opposite direction of tolerance, toward the Counter-Reformation. A very influential personality, whose name you must have heard at one time or another, influential personality of the Counter-Reformation was Cardinal Stanisław Koziusz, actually a German, but a Polonized German, a German family who had come to Kraków and had become so Polish that they gave the name of Stanisław to one of their sons. He was born of a German family in Kraków. He studied law at the universities of Padua and Bologna and ordained to the priesthood in Kraków. In 1543, he became Bishop of Chełmno and then Prince Bishop of Warmia in 1551. Pope Pius IV created him Cardinal in 1561. As his influence continued to grow, he was called to play a role as one of the presidents in the third and final session of the Council of Trent, 1562-1563. From his youth, Hose in German it was, but Koziusz sounds more Polish, doesn't it? Koziusz showed great interest in the goals of the Counter-Reformation and became proficient in the hardest polemics against Protestantism. In order to assure Catholic predominance in society, he regularly challenged the Polish tradition of religious tolerance. This was nonsense for Koziusz, going so far as to call the country very, very nastily a safe haven for every kind of heretic. King Zygmunt August died in 1572, leaving no heir, and I just said that Jagiellonian dynasty came to an end. It was decided that the kings of Poland would henceforth be elected by the Diet, the Sejm. And Koziusz did his very best to see to it that the candidates who were being taken into consideration for the crown would have no Protestant sympathies at all. The classical counter-reformer. He also tried with somewhat less success to discourage kings from continuing the tradition of religious tolerance. Unable to accept the conciliatory policy of Zygmunt II August towards Protestantism, members of the Sejm in 1565, Koziusz left the meeting in protest, and after participating in the influential Lublin Sejm in 1569, he left Poland in protest for Rome and stayed in Italy until his death in 1579, ever doing his very best, even at a distance, to favor Catholic supremacy in the strictest sense of the word within Poland. The Polish Counter-Reformation was strengthened by the arrival in the Commonwealth in 1564 of the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, founded in 1534 by Ignatius of Loyola, as everybody knows. And one of their major goals being the struggle against the spread of Protestantism. By the end of the 16th century, a very different kind of Polish religious identity began to emerge. No longer was Polishness, polskość, seen as a culture of tolerance for the goals of social and political stability, but a quality of ethnic majority population, more and more intimately identified with Catholicism, leading toward what we know today, this idea that to be a real Pole, you have to be a Catholic. Fortunately, I haven't gone so far as to say to be a real Catholic, you have to be a Pole. Right. From the 17th century, paragraph 14, from the 17th century, agents of the Counter-Reformation became increasingly intolerant. They succeeded in introducing censorship, including the index of forbidden books. Some Protestant denominations were banned, while others lost many church buildings and adherents because the political waves were going in the opposite direction. Construction of non-Catholic church buildings was banned in 1632. I don't know if that applied to Eastern Orthodox churches. I don't know. I should have looked that up before I wrote it down. The pacifist Polish Unitarians were expelled from Poland in 1658. So they survived really only in Transylvania. Ostensibly for refusing to aid the country in time of military need. They were pacifists, what do you want? In 1668, the Sejm made it illegal for Catholics to convert to any other faith, but not the other way around. In 1673, non-Catholics were forbidden to be made nobles, to be ennobled. And by the first half of the 18th century, Protestants were barred from most civil offices, including being elected to the Sejm. Sejm is, of course, the parliament, the Diet. We spell it S-E-J-M, okay? Not S-A-M-E, don't worry about that. Paragraph 15. The same 17th century saw other significant developments. For some centuries, Poland claimed the title of bulwark of Christian civilization, in Latin, ante morale Christianitatis. She was not alone in this. The title was also used for other frontline nations, amongst them Armenia, Albania, and Croatia. But the decisive role played by Polish forces, led by King Jan Sobieski in the Battle of Vienna in 1683, which put an end to 250 years of struggle between the Turks and the Holy Roman Empire, did indeed confirm Poland's contribution to defending Christian countries against the heathens, between quotation marks. Nevertheless, I put those quotation marks because I don't want to sound supercilious about them. I want to respect them too, at least in the text and in the rest of my existence. Nevertheless, the period of incursions into Poland by Lutheran Sweden from 1600 to 1629, and again from 1655 to 1661, as well as the repeated Polish involvement in the time of troubles, Smutne Vremya, in Russia, 1598-1613, represented a certain shift in the idea of Poland as bulwark of Christendom against the heathen to that of Catholic bulwark against the Protestants and the Orthodox. This is a very significant shift. Sorry, in the wrong direction, really in the wrong direction. They had it right in the beginning. Why did they want to change? Paragraph 16. The wearisome events of the 17th century had left the Rzeczpospolita considerably weakened militarily, economically, and even constitutionally. During the reign of King Władysław IV of Vaza, in the middle of the 17th century, 1632-1648, a new parliamentary rule was introduced. Everyone knows about this. The Liberum Veto, which provided that any member of the Sejm could veto a decision, and that consequently, for decisions to be binding, they had to be unanimous. This led to near paralysis in decision-making, made a good excuse for the neighbors to say, the country is in chaos, we have to move it. It was in chaos. And it also opened the door to unabashed foreign meddling with the collusion of corrupt members of the Sejm. Yet Poland's neighbors, who were not particularly sympathetic to her plight, so really the basis of the idea of Polish martyrdom, being betrayed by their neighbors. Their neighbors were not sympathetic to Poland's plight. They made some effort to maintain a degree of stability. In 1730, Austria, Prussia, and Russia signed a secret protocol, the alliance of the three black eagles, for the black imperial eagle that appeared in the heraldic insignia of all three empires, in contrast to the white eagle of Poland. The aim of this pact was to preserve the status quo of the Rzeczpospolita as long as they could. But Prussian territorial demands and the activities of the Russian ambassador, Nikolai Vasilievich Repnin, who went so far as to kidnap a bishop. No one knew where he was, and he finally turned up in Kaluga. My sources gave the name of different bishops, but I finally, and I'm not sure which one it was, but I finally came up with the Catholic bishop of Kiev, Józef Andrzej Załuski. With time, the three imperial powers found that the time had come to put an end to the Polish state. And this is the death blow to Polish tradition, the tradition of being a country like any other, but tolerant. A tripartite treaty was signed in Vienna in February 1772 in Vienna. The country that the Poles, the city that the Poles defended, this was the worst betrayal that they could understand. There was some foundation to the hurt and the idea that our brethren are not our brethren anymore. And in early August of the same year, 1772, the Russian, Prussian, and Austrian troops simultaneously invaded the Commonwealth. This was the first, not the last time in the history of Poland that this was going to happen. Invaded the Commonwealth and occupied the Polish provinces agreed upon amongst themselves. Two further partitions ensued in 1793, and the final one in 1795, by which point Poland had disappeared from the map of Europe. This was an historical mistake, I'm sure, but never mind, you'll make your own judgment. With the exception of three puppet states, the Franco-Saxon Duchy of Warsaw, 1807-1812, and its Russian-dominated, that was Franco-Saxon, and the Russian-dominated Duchy of, Congress Kingdom of Poland, Kongresówka, 1815 to 1867. These were states called Poland, but they were dominated by the neighboring countries. And then the Regency Kingdom of Poland under German hegemony between 1917 and 1918. No free and united Polish state was to re-emerge until 1919 after the First World War. This is the background of the Polish original sin, Polish Messianism. Messianism is playing with fire, and the Poles fell into the trap. When I speak about these things to a Polish audience, they're deeply hurt by it. Nevertheless, I'm sharing this with you. These are my convictions. My family is Polish. I think I have a right to say a word about this. Polish national and religious conscience. Sorry. Was to bear the lasting psychological scars of this profound humiliation. Not only did the neighbors of the Rzeczpospolita take full advantage of its weakened condition, but they joined forces first to dismember the state, then ultimately to put an end to it. For the Poles, the period of partition became a time of fervent nationalism, expressed in terms of heroic romanticism. Catholicism played a major role in this development of a new religious nationalism. Piotr Skarga, a Jesuit, 1536 to 1612, so I'm skipping back a century, who left a century and a half, who left a lasting mark on the Polish Counter-Reformation, had sown the seeds of this new ideology. In particular, in his 8 sermons to the Sejm, he was the court preacher in Krakow and also gave sermons to these 8 sermons might not ever, in fact, been preached, but nevertheless, they went unnoticed in the 17th century and reappeared in new editions, one by one, in 8 pamphlets, more than 100 years later. He had supposedly preached them in 1597, but which only had their full impact a century later when they were published individually in 1792. Skarga, this is a quote from Chrostowski, I'll say a word about him. Skarga's prediction of the country's fall, combined with the quality of his prose, he was an excellent writer of the Polish language, led to his recognition as a patriotic visionary, a master who knew what it meant to be Polish. They taught me this in Polish Catholic school in Chicago. Skarga was the man. Inconvenient historical contexts such as that Skarga blamed religious tolerance as one of the chief evils. The mission of Poles is the renewal of Europe and the conversion, of Ukraine and further east, much further east, as far as Japan. That's Poland's God-given mission. This is a dangerous, I need to tell you that, dangerous ideology that's already being founded before the partitioning of Poland. Once the partitioning had begun, many Poles felt compelled to find a religious reason for what was happening, indeed a theological reason for the national tragedy. Why had God permitted that a people whom in their eyes God had chosen, Polish Messianism, why should that people be so demeaned, so punished, so humiliated. For the Romantics, Poland was seen as a place of especially brazen attacks of the evil, but she was made fit for martyrdom by special favors. The sufferings of the Poles were explained as a participation in the sufferings of Jesus Christ. That's a Christian theme, but what they made of it becomes really playing with fire. In the first half of the 19th century, specific analogies between the lot of the Savior and that of Poland became part of Polish religion, the Polish religious mind. Unjust accusations, betrayal by brethren, the hypocrisy of enemies, silence as a form of defense. You stand there and take it, with romantic heroism. These ideas gave rise to rich poetic and spiritual reflections, drawing close parallels between the sufferings of Poland and those of the Savior. But it was Adam Mickiewicz, the Polish national poet, who carried this development still further by coining the phrase Polska Chrystusem narodów. Poland is the Christ of the nations. Not just the Christ among the nations. It's an identification he was given. And it's in this that he is a heretic. Don't quote me before too many Poles, but this phrase has proven to be surprisingly long-lived. It's still very much alive, even in Chicago. Over the last 2 centuries, despite its patent ambiguity, as an analogy, it has inspired rich and beautiful and valid reflections on the link between Christ's saving sufferings and the sufferings of believers. It was also to prove important in sustaining strong religious faith throughout a long period of oppression. And they can be proud of that. I dare say we can be proud of that. It is it likewise gave rise to another perilous exaggeration by confusing the universal mission of Christ with the alleged mission of one particular group, the Polish nation. Moreover, poetic license as such, which was the vehicle of comparison between Christ and Poland, tends to blur the difference between simile and identification. And here we're directly in heresy. Right? I'll try to make that, if I still have time. Make it 5 minutes. I'll do my best. Mickiewicz did some of his most brilliant writing during his years in Paris. He had participated in one of the uprisings, 1830, against Russia, and with many Polish intellectuals found themselves in Poland. That was in Paris. Paris was a brilliant scene of poetry and philosophy in the Polish language. So he was in Paris from 1832 to 1855. It was always a period in which he developed his most daring nationalistic ideas. From 1841 to 1846, Mickiewicz came under the influence, this is less known, of a certain Andrzej Towiański, another Polish exile and intellectual. Towiański was a religious mystic thinker who founded a sectarian movement which he called Koło Sprawy Bożej, the circle concerned with God's cause. Although Towiański encouraged his followers regularly to attend Catholic Mass, his teaching included strong criticism of the institutional church and calls for radical secularization of the clergy. Now that was a bit too much for the Vatican in the time of Gregory XVI, and he was condemned for it. There were others before him, but that wasn't what's a problem for me in Towiański's. It's that identification of the Polish nation with Jesus Christ. Not a comparison, but an identification. In 1842, the French government saw fit. He had gone so far that the French government expelled Thaddée, and he had to go and spend the rest of his life in Zurich. When he left, Mickiewicz took over the presidency of that group, which more and more was becoming a religious sect, although they went to Mass on Sunday. And finally, in 1846, Mickiewicz broke off with them and became I was going to say Orthodox Catholic, a standard Catholic. Very much under the influence of Thaddée's mysticism, Mickiewicz developed the idea of Poland's sufferings as having in themselves a redeeming character. Not in relation to Christ's sufferings, but this is Catholic dolorism. That was one of the sins of 19th century French Catholic exaggerated spirituality. Apostate nations, Russia, I'm sorry to have to say that, but that's the language, had put Poland to death, but she would rise again to bring freedom, Messianism, to all European nations. In 1832, sorry, not 1932, mercifully, that was over by then. In 1832, he wrote, "And on the third day the soul will return to the body, and the nation will rise up from the dead and liberate all the peoples of Europe from captivity. And just as bloody sacrifices on earth came to an end with the resurrection of Christ, so wars in Christianity will cease with the resurrection of the Polish nation." This is eschatology. Other writers soon followed suit. Juliusz Słowacki, who didn't go as far as Mickiewicz, but he had been part of the Thaddée group, had also spent some time with it. And then there are other authors like Krasiński and it's time. Well, let's leave it at that. Okay. You've got my main point.
I think we go to your main point. Thank you so much. Well, we still have some time for questions.
Thank you very much. When you were trying probably to make a comparison of Polish Messianism with other kinds of nationalism in other places, did you find any direct analogy of this kind of direct identification of a nation with Jesus Christ?
I haven't done a systematic comparison. That's
something else that came to my mind. Just trying to figure out whether there are some direct analogies of this, or is it unique?
At this period, we even had Flemish Messianism that lived on alles voor Christus, alles voor Vlaanderen, Vlaanderen for Christus, so that Flanders takes on a priestly, but nobody took that as seriously as the Poles took Mickiewicz seriously and still do. Russian Messianism is the other major Messianism, and I haven't studied it enough.
Yeah, but there was no identification of this kind.
I don't think but I'm not sure. The Serbian is probably the closest with the martyr complex and so, but that's a study that I haven't done.
Also, this famous Greek credo of beginning of 20th century, I believe in Holy Greeks and so on, models according to the credo, real credo.
I couldn't countersign that for all of my love of Greece.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Okay. Yeah, I think we have to leave it here. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.